individuals or corporates may have acted as inspiration for our own. It is always okay to not.
Let's talk about concussions.
That's a tale for another time.
Thank you.
I don't have what most people would think of as a dancer's body, but I am a dancer. I'm also a congenital amputee, which means I was born with a partial left arm, and in my case, the entire left side of my body is a little underdeveloped. I took my first dance class at 23. After spending my life denying my body and disability in order to be more successful in a society that wasn't entirely sure what to make of me, dance put me inside of my body for the first time. Having most of my senses fully engaged at once was something that was foreign to me. It was stimulating and joyful. I loved the effort, turning undiscovered baby muscles into big, confident ones, feeling the tension and release of the movements in my body, seeing myself grow through struggle and work, and feeling the sensation of becoming art. After a year of classes and working to adapt movements to my body, I started performing, and the adrenaline had me hooked. Despite how much I love dancing and performing, something changes when I get off stage. I get well-intended comments from the audience. People tell me that I'm inspiring, brave, and that I'm beautiful inside and out. These aren't compliments, and you shouldn't say them to people. Here's how I interpret these comments. Oh, thank you. It inspires me that you can parade your weird body in public like that. You're brave for parading your weird body in public, and you have to have a good personality because your body is so weird, but I have to acknowledge that your weird body is beautiful too. People often ask me, what can I say to disabled people? I don't want to offend anyone, and I know you don't. But unfortunately, there's no formula. It's on you to examine your feelings and then choose to communicate them or not. It's also never required for you to share your opinions at all, because your opinions aren't as important as you think they are. Please forgive me if that sounds harsh. My disability has made me the recipient of many unsolicited high fives and kind words. People often make the assumption that because of my seemingly tragic body, I must need validation from strangers, but I don't. So the reason for this well-meaning, though incredibly awkward behavior is a lack of exposure to disabled people. And the exposure that you do have is inspiration porn. For those of you not familiar with that term, it's this idea that disabled people exist to inspire able people. And it often comes with the notion that disability is something to overcome, which is incorrect. The hardest things we have to overcome are chronic exclusion and inaccessibility. But because most able-bodied people are inclined to blame our bodies and our disabilities for our suffering, they tend to get this wrong when they tell our stories. We need to tell our own stories and take ownership of our art. Art goes way beyond self-expression. It's the meeting of discipline and passion. It's where we explore our loftiest ideals and our deepest struggles. It's in our media, advertising, architecture, design, and in our most loved stories and films. If the arts continue to exclude disabled voices, we remain invisible everywhere. And you can only value what you can see. Dance has made some attempts to create segregated spaces for us, but most often they're led by able bodies. And typically, they're not taken seriously in the mainstream because a lot of audiences are still very attached to this idea that a real dancer is physically generic and superhuman. So while it's important for these spaces to exist, it's absolutely crucial that they're led by disabled dancers in order to ensure that the participants are represented as accurately as possible. The need for inclusion goes way beyond performance. It actually starts in the dance studio. In my years of studying dance, I have grown frustrated with having to teach myself to adapt movements and exercises to my body. I pay the same amount for classes as my able-bodied peers, but I'm not prioritized in the same way. I have to do the labor of adapting as well as simply learning and integrating the material. Early on in my dance life, my desire to do things correctly overrode my desire to do things that made sense for my body. I frequently found myself trying to mimic alternating arm movements using an imaginary limb, which is a lot harder than it sounds. It requires a lot of focus that would have been better spent on muscle engagement and expression, and it made my dancing look really stiff and robotic. This inspired me to seek out instructors who teach with a more internal focus, the ones who explain movement in terms of muscle initiation, physical sensation, and an overall aesthetic. These instructors who taught with respect to my physical sensations made me feel fully included. I didn't have to experience the self-consciousness of doing things differently because the idea of adaptation is celebrated. I'm guided to do things that suit my body because we're all working from a deep internal and individual place. So it isn't about seeing and mimicking, but feeling the sensations in the body and then responding. As a result, all the dancers seem to move more expressively and authentically, and our injuries are respected and cared for. I feel really fortunate to have had exposure to instructors who teach this way, because it's informed the way I teach. And we tend to sort of teach the way we were taught. So the idea of adopting a brand new philosophy around physical skill can seem daunting, but it's not impossible. The most important thing you can do is to treat all limitations with a sense of wonder and curiosity. Think of them as leading to innovation because they will. Viewing bodies as objectively as possible takes the pressure of perfection off of everyone, putting everyone in a relaxed mindset, which, as we know, is optimal for learning. Praise adaptation, which disabled people are already masters of. Freeing us up to make adjustments for our bodies allows us to find our own strengths within the dance. The task of creating inclusive studios isn't just on the teachers, it's on the students as well. When students advocate for themselves, it gives everyone else permission to do the same. I once had an able-bodied student with a knee injury stop me at the beginning of class and tell me that she wouldn't be able to participate in the lesson. Immediately after she spoke up, another student, one with a disability that causes hypermobility and chronic pain, told me that she also wouldn't be able to participate. I dug into my reserves of flexibility and I changed my lesson at the last minute. In order to avoid putting too much strain on the knees, we needed to incorporate other areas of the body. And in using more of the body and more muscles, the movement became bigger and more dynamic. So because my students were brave enough to advocate for themselves, everyone was able to participate in the class that they had paid for, and we were able to spend some time creating something more interesting. Witnessing the benefits of this method on my peers and my students made me realize something. When disabilities are prioritized, we all win. Even though most of my peers are visibly able-bodied, or rather temporarily able-bodied, everybody has injuries and inconsistencies that require care. And in caring for them, I'm cared for as well. In acknowledging our collective limitations, we all move safer. These inclusion practices can reach beyond the arts. In addition to teaching dance, I also teach preschoolers with disabilities and behavior challenges. I spend portions of my day scrambling to find picture cards that signify the next transition or task so that I can communicate more effectively with a child who's just been given a verbal instruction but needs a visual reinforcement in order to fully understand what's expected of them. I then find myself taking this same picture card to another child whose home languages aren't the language spoken in the classroom. So this tool that was designed for a child with a communication delay, for example, also happens to benefit someone who doesn't speak the classroom language. So if we were to fully incorporate visuals with verbal instruction, these two different groups would have more opportunities to learn alongside with their peers. And the beauty of this is that it takes nothing away from the able-bodied, neurotypical English-speaking kids. It only allows them access to these visual reinforcements as well. Being in these environments every day, as well as existing as a disabled person, makes me realize just how much we idolize these ideas of able-bodied and neurotypical. We see accommodations for disabled people as beneath this imaginary gold standard of able-bodiedness. The reason for this is because able-bodied people have been making all of the decisions. That's why we have this idea that inclusion is simply allowing a disabled person into a space, and that us being there costs money and places a burden on the larger population. But that's wrong. Inclusion is creating your environment for the people with the greatest level of need, and then bringing out the ways in which that benefits everyone. Accessibility doesn't just benefit you when you eventually become disabled, it benefits you right now too. Have you ever had your hands full and then had to open a door using that big square button? That's accessibility. Or have you ever pushed a child in a stroller into a building and so you chose to use a wheelchair ramp? Or have you ever been watching TV and wanted to turn the captions on because the room was too loud? That's accessibility. These innovations aren't for you, but you get to benefit from them. This model for inclusion isn't just for dance classes, but for your workplace, classrooms, and your world. We often think that when we include disabled people, we have to give something up, but imagine living in a world without these little conveniences, the buttons, the ramps, the captions. Now imagine that it's you who needs them, because if you're lucky enough to grow old, it will be. Ableism as a tool of oppression has always confused me because no one is actually on top. Disability is the only minority group you can and most likely will join. So as people work to preserve an ableist society, they're investing in their own future relevance. People want to look away from disability because it forces them to think about their own mortality. But in looking away from it, disability becomes a lot harder to deal with when it happens to you. Changing the way we think about disability and inclusion isn't easy. Even with the perspective I have, I still have to make an effort to think and act inclusively. But I want to challenge you to find the brilliance, the beauty, and the efficiency of full access. So if focusing on how you can benefit from it convinces you to implement it, do it. But know that your benefiting is secondary to bringing members of the largest minority group into places where decisions are being made, into classrooms, dance studios, and on stages. When we gain control of our art, content, and services, you gain automatic access to the improvements that we make out of necessity. But we can't do that if you can't see us. Thank you.